Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time it is the not exactly new Tier 6 Pan-European or Swedish destroyer Öland. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, then we'll discuss commanders, run down the stats with you, and finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to jump around, please check out the time codes in the description. The Öland was the lead ship in a class that was intended to comprise 4 ships, however only 2 would be built. In the lead up to World War II, in Europe, Sweden found itself surrounded by increasingly the inevitability of conflict. Though not all obvious if you looked at the age and design of ships in service for Sweden in the 1930s, she actually was relatively comfortably situated in the Baltic. Norway, Finland, and Denmark weren't looking to cause a lot of trouble, and beyond that they were next to a largely disarmed Germany, a newfound Poland which had more interest in existing than anything else, and the Soviet Union, which hadn't quite struck the balance between wanting to be a functional society and continuing their war against their own people for insufficient ideological purity. As the winds of war started to blow, the need to expand and modernize in order to ensure its sovereignty led Sweden to purchase additional ships like the Romulus and Sälander class destroyers from Italy, where they would have been known as the Spica and Sella class, to supplement Göteborg class ships that they were building domestically. This helped increase their destroyer force by 50% by 1940. Though officially neutral, Sweden would see the writing on the wall. In fact, they would hear it as they had intercepted word of the forthcoming invasion of Poland, information that was quietly shared with the Poles. Of course, overwhelmed, Poland would still fall to Germany and the Soviet Union in September 1939. When Russia decided to expand its territorial ambitions in the very bloody and thoroughly mismanaged invasion of its smaller neighbor Finland later that year, it would only highlight the need to bolster their naval forces. Later in 1940, the Soviet Union invaded Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, while Germany would move against Denmark in 1940, and in an interesting turn of events, both Germany and Great Britain would move to invade Norway within days of one another, with Germany ultimately being successful in its bid to control the Northern Kingdom. Sweden's non-belligerent status was ultimately maintained throughout the war as it carefully walked the tightrope of trading partner, secret usurper, and always being just a bit more trouble than would have been worth it to both Germany and Russia, who admittedly were busy trying to fight basically all of their other neighbors. Throughout the war, additional Swedish destroyers came online, like the Moda and Visby classes. By and large, these ships were suitable for their purposes as green water coastal defense ships. That said, with anti-aircraft defense becoming an increasing priority, the elevation of these previously mentioned ships would not have allowed a lot of AA defense, either for the ship itself or for targets around it. The Öland class was designed to solve this one particular problem. This was done through the use of the 12cm, or as we'll see in game, 120mm L50 model 1942 Bofors gun. This 4.7-inch cannon would be able to elevate to 80 degrees. With this elevation, along with fast tracking and semi-automatic loading system, each cannon could put out as many as 20 shells per minute. Added to the vaunted 40mm Bofors and additional 8 25mm guns, this would have been a well-defended ship from the air, at least for a destroyer. The main battery could also depress to -10 degrees, helping the ship to defend itself against smaller craft, and probably when she was being designed you'd be thinking of something similar to a German E-boat being a threat around coastal Sweden. All this main battery firepower did mean that the design featured a relatively light torpedo armament of just 6 torpedoes and 2 triple launchers. Öland would be laid down in July 1943, launch 4 months after the surrender of Germany in December 1945, and commissioned into service in December 1947. Öland was named after the province Öland, which is one of the larger islands of Sweden. The other ship of the class was the Uppland, which also shares the name of a Swedish province, leading these ships to sometimes be referred to as the province-class destroyers. The last 2 ships of the class were cancelled before being laid down. Both ships of the Öland class arrived too late for World War II, but would serve deep into the Cold War, where again Sweden would be neutral, though perhaps not an impartial participant, with both ships receiving upgrades to radar and anti-submarine warfare, while removing smaller caliber AA from the ships. In 1972, they were both reclassified as frigates, and were later removed from service in July 1978. Both ships were sold for scrap in 1981. When talking about Öland in World of Warships Legends, the ship is a very competent knife fighter. Due to the high rate of fire and favorable turret performance, she has both firepower and flexibility to challenge any destroyer at her tier. It has also even invited comparisons to being a Tier 6 Friesland, or just a better version of the Skåne. I sense that the latter is closer to true than the former, so let's just talk about that. What the Öland does particularly well is shoot things. The fact that her back turret rotates 360 degrees makes her feel a bit like a Jervis versus a Lightning. Only in this case, the ship you're being compared to is Friesland. That is definitely true. You have a good amount of AA firepower for a destroyer, and that is made even better when you consider that you have access to DFAA. Inclusion of a heal improves the overall survivability of destroyers that are able to disengage after their first knife fight. The reason why Öland is probably more comparable to Skåne than Friesland are those consumables. She has no access to a smoke screen. This gives the Öland a significant disadvantage versus most destroyers, who will often have a get-out-of-jail-free card. Öland players will have to be careful about how they engage enemy ships, or else they may find themselves spotted by other enemies, hopefully not an HE spamming cruiser, or else they will find themselves on the bad end of trades in spite of their good gun performance. She's also not particularly fast, which makes having no smoke a larger inconvenience versus, say, French DDs that can run away from other surface ships. She does have torpedoes, which is definitely nice to have, but the low damage and small number of fish that you have on board may not be appealing to folks who tend to enjoy devastating strikes with Japanese destroyers, though it should be noted that the torpedo reload of Öland is quite comfortable. When looking at commanders, Öland is capable enough to justify all of these builds, though that doesn't mean they're equally viable. Starting at the beginning, Swedish is undoubtedly the gunboat commander for the Pan-Europeans. He's a wonderful choice in general because he starts with bonus stealth. That's really useful because it gives you the ability to take a second stealth inspiration and something else. For instance, additional HP or more damage reduction. Additionally, if you like mortar, it's going to make the overall hit to your stealth a little bit less than it would be for other nations. You have two options for radio positioning finding, and I would personally stick with Perceptive just because if you're attacking, you don't need to worry so much about your turret traverse thanks to your rear 360 turret. What's not so great is you really don't have a choice in slot 4. Cloudy Days is the only one of these that have any effect, and though this may well be the best choice, it doesn't feel like it does as much as you would expect for this particular boat. The torpedo commander is Stig Eriksson. With him, the Öland has pretty impressive torpedo reload, well under a minute if you have it all the way leveled up, which may be something of a questionable choice since this is never going to be a top shelf torpedo boat. His unique ability, Sheltered Arms, does give you the ability to keep your turrets in the game because losing one of these is incredibly bad, but it's also almost something that never happens. If you want to think outside the box, Conrad Hilfreich offers you two major advantages. You're already a good fire starter, and with Burn It Down, you'll boost the ship from good for a destroyer to levels I would call okay, though not incredible, for a cruiser. You can do this a bit further away too, if that's what you want. With Fully Packed, you end up with 3 kinds of 3 different consumables, which makes having effectively over 20,000 hit points a possibility, at least as long as you don't get yourself deleted too quickly. Having a third engine boost or DFAA consumable is occasionally useful, but since you're off tier for carriers, maybe not quite as useful as ye old Boss Dewey build. The issues that you'll face here are similar though. You won't have radio position finding that comes with Twist and Track or Perception, deceptive, and if you want to use fully packed, then you're susceptible to having your engine and rudder knocked out, which is not ideal. As we get into stats, I hope to say that the numbers you'll see on screen are base statistics. I want to say that I got pretty close, but I'm not going to say it's exact. In any case, the concealment does include the camo that comes with the ship. Looking first at survivability, you'll have 14,100 hit points, which is a little lower than average. But that's not uncommon if you consider that it is a gunboat, and ships like the Benson are likely only to be able to take 1 or 2 more shots than you. The armor here is typical tier 6 armor, and since most people will be shooting HE at you, the green and light blue on this screen represents areas where the ship will take damage, and the dark blue represents water. On the bright side, if you don't take all of this damage at once, you will have access to at least 2 heals, which will help you restore around 2,000 hit points, which definitely adds to the Öland's survivability. For artillery, you come with a 2x2 arrangement of 120mm guns. That's not a lot of guns on paper, but thanks to the 2.5 second reload, it will mean that you're able to throw out about 35% more damage per minute, which will be the bread and butter of this ship. You have a similar advantage with AP, but since these guns don't seem to have extraordinary penetration, you're probably best to stick with HE, unless you either can't set more fires on your target, or they are at the sort of suicidally close ranges where you might find use for American or British destroyer AP. The high rate of fire combines nicely with this 7% fire chance to also make you a great fire starter out of the box. It would be nice if the range were a little bit longer because you lack smoke. This 10.7 kilometers is pretty in line with other tier 6 destroyers, as is the 18-second turret traverse, but like I said before, its rear turret does rotate 360 degrees. That makes it very convenient to push into knife fights. All in all of these stats make the Öland a very capable ship in a destroyer versus destroyer matchup, even if the damage per shot is a bit on the low side. Similar to Skåne, you come with 2 racks of 3 torpedoes each. I would call this a light torpedo armament because it's not a lot of torpedoes and they only do about 2/3 the damage of most tier 6 torpedoes, 10,700 rather than around 15,000. Perhaps because of this, they appear to cause flooding to their targets a little less often than torpedoes from other nations, but that may just be an anecdote. Nevertheless, they do have 2 large advantages though. At 76 knots, they are extremely fast, particularly for a ship with very long range, 12-kilometer torpedoes, and that makes them a bit easier to aim. They reload fairly quickly, 70 seconds base. That's not fast enough to make this a good torpedo boat. In fact, there are a lot of battleships that this thing can't kill in one single volley, even if you hit them with all your fish, but it does mean that they are usually available when you need them for some extra damage and utility. When it comes to AA, Öland is second only to Kidd in terms of AA defense for a tier 6 destroyer, and it has an overall DPS that is about twice what you'd expect from her peers. Though much is made probably of this ship being a mini Friesland, even with DFAA active, the Öland is really only competitive with decent tier 6 cruiser AA, and Friesland still obtains a noticeable damage per second advantage at all ranges. Based on experience, this isn't wildly intimidating to tier 7 carriers, though you do nicely supplement nearby allies' air cover. And even though this may be a strength of this ship, since your AA does greatly outrange your detection by air, you may want to familiarize yourself with how to turn this thing off, at least under certain circumstances, because it's not powerful enough to really stop a strike. The Öland is a bit on the slow side when it comes to maneuverability, with a top speed out of the box of only 35 knots. Its 610-meter turning circle and 3.4 second rudder are unlikely to really impress you, but these are at least on the right side of average. And other than moments when you really need to run away, chase, or relocate in a hurry, the ship doesn't feel bad to steer. Concealment on Öland is pretty middle of the pack as well. You're 100 meters below average from sea, so as you might expect, you will probably get outspotted by those ultra-annoying Japanese destroyers, have a very noticeable advantage against things like Russian destroyers, but just an edge on almost everything else. Finally, with consumables, you have a very different set of consumables than most destroyers. First, you have the normal destroyer damage control party. Then we're going to talk about the speed boost. That's also standard, but your last two consumables aren't. Rather than having a smoke screen, you have two other consumables here. The first being a heal. While not particularly powerful, this does allow you to recover 1960 hit points twice per game. Equipping Sims as an inspiration will increase this to almost 2300, so it's something to think about there. And of course, there are ways to get additional heals if desired. Next, you have 2 charges of DFAA. It's going to double your AA for 40 seconds. Since you have good AA for Destroyer, this will mean that you have more teeth than most of the little boats in the game, but don't fool yourself about what a little giant you are and go looking for fights. Carriers will still have the upper hand against you. Alright, and with all that out of the way, we're going to jump into some gameplay. The keen-eyed among you can see that we're not going to be on Greece, but that was a thing. In any case, we are on Two Brothers. I am in the Öland. I am playing this ship with an alternative camo because I think this looks better. So, anyway, we have a very basic thing going on here, and we're going to go ahead and put our commander up. We are, of course, using Stig Eriksson, which is not perfectly pronounced, but it's close enough. For our purposes, we're going to go ahead show you the game with the Swedish commander, because this is a Swedish ship. Now, if you do want to play this with another commander, you can come away with really good results, some of which may be a little too good for a review video. You'll notice that the voices in the background are kind of chirping away at an unnatural pace, and that is mostly because at the beginning of the game, we're going to be paying attention to this middle channel. It has become popular for people to jump in the middle and just try to bum rush the enemy cap. That said, I am paying attention to our RPF indicator. You can't really see it all that well right now, but it's this circular thing up in the clouds, which gives us a vague understanding of where the closest ship is. The closest ship continues to be in the middle of the map. Now, this is a great way to waste a conscientious player's time by doing this, but it also is a great way to waste your own time if you don't want to go up the middle. And as soon as we do see somebody, we're going to try to play the far side of the pass through the middle of the map, and we launch all of our torpedoes, hoping to get 1, maybe 2 hits at the very max. And you can see with our torpedo build here, we have more or less a minute worth of reload. Not too bad. Not like wildly incredible, but not bad. It's not lost on me that there are now 3 battleships going through the middle of the map. Curiously enough, I'm playing this game with Mark, aka White, the German CC, and Captain Yoink, who is the man who more or less has shamed me into making this video, as this is a Swedish ship, and I guess a very fond thing for him to think about. In any case, he is also in a division with us, and we had kind of predicted, and by we I mean they, had kind of predicted that several people were going to go up the middle. In fact, I believe the call at the beginning of the game was 3 battleships. Now, I am not an ideal torpedo boat to be doing the things that I'm doing, but the fast reload here is helping a little bit, because we're able to put out a lot of potential damage, even though when you see that torpedo hit, we've got 2 torpedo hits now for just 15k. That third one brings us up to almost 22,000 with 1 tick of flooding. So, you know, not extremely powerful torpedoes, but you get a lot of them, and you can see we're already counting down less than 10 seconds to our next volley. We switch to widespread. There are actually only 2 spread types on this ship, which now that I say it is like every ship. However, those spread types are narrow and very narrow. So this widespread is actually narrower than a lot of normal spreads that you'll see on other ships. We put 1 set of torpedoes out on Scharnhorst. We send another set of torpedoes out towards the Caracciolo. Unfortunately, we don't get both of them, but we do hit Scharnhorst with a whole bunch of torpedoes. He goes down. We're up to 27K.
Engine boost activated. All stations, protect that target.
And we're trying to judge as we count down again to 0 seconds where the Caracciolo is going to be. He's been kind of maneuvering wildly. I'm going to aim pretty far in front of this guy, thinking that he's going to eventually try to straight line it towards Mark, who's in our King George V. And if he does that, he'll naturally accelerate into those torpedoes. This isn't a terrible idea under some circumstances, but as we jump into first person, we can see that it doesn't always work. Unfortunately, this does mean that my mistake is going to cost Mark his life, but this is neither the first or the last time that something that I do is going to get Mark killed. So that's unfortunate. Now we're going to have to start dealing with these ships that have broken all the way through our backfield. We're down a ship, and these ships are relatively low on hit points. So I just decide we just got to start using our guns. As long as I aim high and hit superstructure, I should be able to do some damage. And while that double strike hardly seems like it was earned, I did hit both of those ships several times, I think. Maybe not the Caracciolo. Now you see me aiming at that gap. I would pay attention to the minimap. There is a battleship that I expect will be coming through that gap as the closest or most straight line method of getting to our cap. So I'm going to put a whole bunch of torpedoes out there and just hope that the timing is right. We are continuing forward towards our RPF indicator. And though you don't see a lot of pinging of the map, I'm basically telling Captain Yoink exactly where I expect to see this particular ship once I encounter him. There's obviously a couple of destroyers over here, I think. T-61 does not have, apparently, either its sonar or its smoke up, so we are putting shells out there. Even with a couple of our skills eating into our gun performance, you can see that the Öland still has very comfortable firepower as far as a destroyer main battery goes. As you might expect, we have our torpedoes back in stock, and we're getting close to evening it up this particular match. We have the same number of ships, but thanks to all of the ships that have been hanging around in our base, we're a little bit behind on points by about a cruiser overall. One hit on Dunkirk. She starts to flood, and I continue to pump shells out there. It looks like they're going to die. Captain Yoink yoinks it at the very, very end. And now I'm going to open up on Mayan. This has been a pretty good recovery and a pretty good bit of captaining back here to bend but not break. Our continued firepower out on the Mayan results in another kill, and we very nicely skate past a number of particular interest. I guess possibly 2 of them. Now at this point we're going to speed the game up a little bit again because of course the last ship that's in the game is a long way away from me. Now I will say that both Captain Yoink and I are trying to coordinate where in the world we think this particular boat is. I don't think that we're wrong, but in this particular circumstance, it would actually make a little bit more sense in retrospect to go up the middle. Since the hood has been spotted, we know that the enemy destroyer is actually chasing him. So this would have been a probably good time to take a hard left and deal with that. Instead, I continue forward. We're in pretty good position overall. The hood has the enemy base capped, and even if he does die, we should win just on points. In any case, as the game keeps going, I will go ahead, share my closing thoughts on Öland. As any destroyer without a smoke screen or any particularly special spotting tools like sonar or radar, the Öland will provide a challenge to anyone wanting to play her, but she is a very capable ship. Good at pushing, you will need to leave yourself a way out, and realizing that most sensible destroyer players are probably going to choose to disengage if they can. As long as you're controlling how many people can shoot at you when you do that, the heals will make, even when they run away, a useful break in the action and leave you kind of in a better place to engage overall. Now you can see in the background we're starting fire again. You can judge for yourself how floaty these shells are not. My particular take on this is that this is just bad gunnery on my part. But in any case, overall, Öland, very capable gunboat close up. Very fun when you get into gunboat engagements. She does have some advantages in terms of torpedoes, which kind of makes her a decent all-arounder, but DFAA does kind of trick you into thinking this is a pretty good AA platform. It is for a destroyer, it's not overall. Don't get too confident out there. That's really for your defense. In any case, I hope this review has been helpful for you guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And as always, I hope to see you on the next one.